Gas. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that very nice introduction. I'm going to ask that everybody, now this isn't ask me anything event or ask an arborist event. So what I want to do with this, because we've got a little over, I believe a little over an hour, at least I have that. I have more, if you guys have more, always happy to answer questions, but I want to put it on your radar that part of this talk I'm going to go through rather quickly, and part of that is because I want to get your questions, and this is a little bit more to wet your whistle, so just get you thinking about some questions that you're very likely to come across and not really know where to get the answers to. So just a quick disclaimer before we move along. Let's get the show on the road here. Bada bing. Okay. So a big part of this talk, or what I want to focus on tonight, is trees and construction impact, because that's where a lot of the problems come across and come up to us in the urban environment. When we see trees fail, when we see trees die, there's always a question of sort of like, oh, okay, well, it just sort of happens. Like, it doesn't just happen. Like when we have a storm damage incident, for example, it's a lot like a fire, right? When there's a fire, usually there's an investigation. How did the fire start? It didn't just happen. There would be an electrical problem, or somebody fell asleep smoking a cigarette, or left a candle on, right? There's always something that leads to something that starts a fire. When a tree falls on a house, there's always something that leads to something that led to the tree failing. And it could be a natural process like decay, which is something that I'm really passionate about. Or it could be something like an artificial process, like the installation of a home, the building of a hot tub, something like that. I've seen that a lot of, and it's always sad. Sometimes it's even the complete removal and reinstallation of turf. I've seen many beautiful, seemingly healthy trees die overnight, in a matter of years, really, after new turf has been installed. That's a very common one and very surprising to most people. So, quick disclaimer: it's important to know that no tree is safe, and nothing is really safe in the classic sense of the word. As a tree risk assessor myself, I speak in the language of risk, and one of the important parts of that language is identifying that there is always risk. If you have a giant tree and you cut it down, you can still trip over the stump. And so this is something that we always kind of keep in mind when we're talking about trees. Is I'll comment on things here. Every case is different, much like human medicine. You need to know the patient and the specifics to really know all the inner workings. And the neat thing about this, so this mushroom right there, in one sense, is not safe because it is deadly poisonous. That is Amanita virosa. So that is one of our most poisonous mushrooms that we have in Ontario. Now, it looks beautiful. Its common name is destroying angel. It is also a really, really valuable mycorrhizal fungus that helps to keep trees healthy and helps to bring nutrients out of the soil that trees can't get themselves. So in one sense, there is a very high risk to an individual when it comes to eating that tree. But if your tree has that, that's, on the other hand, really good for the health of the tree. It's a good sign. A quick little bit about my background. Mac and Humber. So I actually went to Mac for history, which, I read a lot. There's a picture of me just in case I forget what I look like. And the long and the short of it is I really love trees. I'm really passionate about taking care of them, and the industry of arboriculture, where we do take care of trees. It's a very difficult, it's a hard job. It takes a great deal of skill, and it's one of those things that as our communities change, I think we're going to see the role of arborists actually grow. If we want to have robust communities with trees as green infrastructure, and for all of the other myriad benefits that they bring. And so what are the goals today? Walking away with something practical for managing your trees. Talking a little bit about building challenges, because this is what people, especially Oakville, Burlington, these are great examples. And I should also reference, in my background, it says that I am the supervisor of forest planning and health for the city of Burlington. I don't really comment on things municipally, especially in this role. This role is specifically in a case-to-case. How do we protect our trees? How do I help you with your trees? And so if you're hiring a company, what should you think about, right? So often have I seen folks who have hired a builder, a pool installation, especially during the pandemic, who've lost their trees because the builder, good, well-intentioned as they may be, ended up building something that killed a tree. The worst is when people build a driveway system that's meant to accentuate a tree as a focal point and ends up inadvertently killing the tree, which is really disappointing for people if they spend $50,000, $60,000 on a massive project only to have a tree come down. And at that point, the removal of that tree is astronomically expensive. It's a lot cheaper to take a tree down in a field than it is in a $60,000 driveway. And so planning for these things in advance, if you can walk away with this idea that, oh, okay, before we even get to the practical management, let's go to planner in. Understand how do trees cope with root loss, because that is a major cause of tree decline in the urban environment. Root loss from construction, often managing that construction impact after it happens, and of course, what do you do afterwards, or what do you do before if you want to plant a tree, but you also have ideas of building something down the line. So you want to prevent problems. Right? So there's an example of Toronto's tree protection barriers. I always say to people, the bylaws are really important to follow. For a number of reasons. One, because you don't get a ticket, and two, because you don't break the law. But three, it's actually the purpose of these bylaws are to protect trees from dying. Like a lot of the time their purpose is to protect the urban forest, right? Because this is a shared asset that we all have. But that also means to protect homeowners, because the number of homeowners that don't want to do this is a lot higher than homeowners who don't care about indiscriminately killing their trees. Most people who have their trees die in construction impact find out years later astronomically expensive to mitigate. And so this is one of the reasons why we always encourage why tree bylaws exist in the first place. So here's a funny one. This is about planning. And in this case, this was a subdivision in Victoria, Melbourne specifically, in Australia. This tree here is actually a silver maple. And silver maples, as you may know, they're native to Canada. Cool winters, warm, humid summers. Down there, it's a bloody desert. And it was one of the first jobs I got hired for when I moved down there. And they'd said, oh, okay, well, get the Canadian guy to look at the silver maples. And sure enough, I look at them and it's the middle of the summer. When was the last time you watered them? Oh, man, like 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. When's the next watering plan? We were planning to water it for another 8 weeks. It's like, okay, so first things first, you have to water the tree. Now, what happened in this case is they didn't survive. There's a whole new industrial subdivision here. The council had asked for them to, and sure enough, their goal was just to limp it along far enough. In this case, I had said, as silly as it is, that you have to water the tree and you have to water it weekly. Like if it gets dry, you make sure get some water. In the US and parts of the Carolinas, they call this the swamp maple. It's one of the reasons why it does so well in our urban environment, oddly enough. But on the left-hand side, these black dots that you see here, these are all fungal fruiting bodies of fungi that actually kill the cambium of the tree. So they kill the bark and cause cankers. Some of you may be familiar with them. This right here, this piece of wood, you can kind of see the machine is kind of blurry, is covered in canker. It was another maple that had to be cut down because of having a really bad canker infection. But what happens in this case is they can water this tree all they want. This fungus is there forever, right? So you want to make sure that when you do these things, and when the horses left the barn, as it were, with the tree, you know what you're getting into, because this tree is going to struggle for the rest of its life because of 6 weeks of neglect, and it can really happen fast. Now, of course, good watering and good nutrients can turn it around, but it requires more attention. Tree care takes a lot of different forms. This one is actually from Russia, in Ekaterinburg, which is in the Asiatic Russia. These are poplars. They're actually one of the only trees that really grow well up there. Not a great way to maintain a tree, but part of what we say with arboriculture is, well, at the end of the day, it's the interplay between trees and people. And in this case, it's a lot easier to put a poplar in anywhere. Really, I can make a poplar grow anywhere, and so have the Russians. You see, there's cars parked all around it. Instead of letting a canopy grow and have to manage the risk of maintaining a massive tree every year, every 2 years in some places, they come through and they just cut everything off. They just hack it back like that. And then it shoots, and shoots are all really small. They're not a big deal. And then once they become a little bit of a deal, they just hack them right off again. Not great for the tree. Don't advise you doing this to your own trees. When you're doing any construction, right? What are some of the things that you should be looking for? What are some of the things that people you hire should be looking for, right? Watch that nursery stock. So that small tree that I talked about moments ago, or in this case, this on the left-hand side here, that's actually a pointer out. There we go. That right there, that is a fungus known as white pine blister rust. It's an invasive fungus, generally found on white pines, and actually has a relationship between white pines and currants. So you maybe know them as ribes. You don't want to buy stock that is sick. So you want to make sure whenever you're buying a tree, you know what to look for. Those fungal fruiting bodies, the black pieces, and these orange pieces here are good things to look for. If you find them, it's worth talking about. Pruning, sterilization of tools. I've talked about this with a lot of different groups. If it's a really significant pathogen, it's worthwhile considering. So something like dogwood anthracnose, which can kill a dogwood, you might want to consider sterilizing your tools or making sure that the people that you hire sterilize their tools. Similarly, if something like you're just doing regular pruning, what exactly does that mean, right? If I'm pruning a maple, do I need to worry about sterilizing my tools? There's not a pathogen going around. Kind of like when COVID was a really big deal and everybody was washing their hands every 5 minutes because they wanted to mitigate risk. Excuse me. Sterilizing your tools is kind of like that. If you're dealing with something that has a higher risk of infection, you may want to consider it. What are some of the things that have a high risk of infection? You should ask me when we get to the question period. Okay, construction problems. So the thing to look at with construction, and this is actually a classic one. I can't remember where this photo is exactly, but it just tells the classic story. So you have right here a tree protection barrier put up and a driveway, which is really the easiest access. But for some reason, people have still decided to use this area to move. And consequently, we can, dollars to donuts, the roots of that tree have certainly made their way there long before the construction happened. But all it needs is a good amount of construction and soil compaction to kill those roots. And all of a sudden, that entire infrastructure that the tree has gone over the matter of days. And this is what people don't realize. I had a conversation with my wife just to talk about acute impact that can come from construction. I had rented an 80-foot lift to do one of our trees on our property. It benefits being an arborist. Interestingly enough, though, the lift was big enough that it was the exhaust from the lift was in the branches of another one of our trees. I didn't think of it because it was 6 hours of operation, not a very long time for it to be there. 3 months later, everything that the exhaust had touched was gone. And I had this conversation with my wife, and she was like, "Oh, it doesn't make any sense. It's not that long. It's such a big tree." It's like, well, any human, I can't go 2 minutes without air. Realistic, I could, as strong and healthy as I may be, as robust and long as my life is, still there's certain things, and it's very similar to trees. If they lose the air or if they lose a root system, doesn't matter how old and how robust that root system is. Once it's disconnected, it's disconnected, and you're not getting it back until you literally regrow it. And so this is where, in this case, okay, it's not the construction barrier has done what it has to a degree. It stopped anybody from going on the other side, but there will still be impact. And it's ironic because in this job site, I don't know why they didn't just go up the driveway. Seems like it makes a lot of sense to me. But there's always, to be fair, there's always things in a job that changes. So things to know when it comes to tree health overall, prevention is the best medicine, right? So keep it healthy. Once something's living in it or on it, it's impossible to separate the two. They become one. The tree is like a little environment, and the tree bark and the tree wood is kind of like soil for a lot of microorganisms. Don't let problem fungi become established. I would love to talk to you all about fungi. If any of you have any questions about this mushroom or that, please bring it up. And remember, it's the environment that really makes the big deal, the environment and the diet. You can put as many fertilizers as you want. Don't get me started about fertilizers. Talking about fertilizers, very controversial. The real long and the short of it is you can try and dose the tree with as much as you want. If the environment is garbage, the tree is going to have to manage that permanently, because it can't get up and move. And I mean, you can transplant it, but then that's a whole other kettle of fish. And this is the kicker. The urban forest is an artificial environment. So just like I had said, you can dose as much as you want. You want to be able to have your artificial environment mimic the native environment of the tree as best as possible. Doesn't matter what the tree is. If you can mimic that tree's native environment, you are going to get the best dividends, the best growth, generally the best structure, wood formation, all of the above, because the tree is going to be happy, right? You can put the tree in bad soil and you can do what you can to improve that environment, and that's going to be good as well. But if you just tree's going to have to continually grow in it, and the more amendments you put in, for every amendment that you put in, for all the fertilizer that you put in, it's going to run off. That's just what's going to happen. So if you have soil that is alive with other microbiota, it's going to help improve the quality of the soil permanently, because it becomes an ecosystem. This is actually where fungi really play a massive role. They actually tie the soil together, much like roots. We see the roots and we think, oh, they're stopping erosion. Yes, but it's all part of one big picture. And the large roots help stop erosion in one way. The sinker roots, which are the sort of thicker, the whippy roots, and the root hair fibers and the feeder roots, they all help in their own little way. And the smaller and smaller that you get, the more it's like little threads. The fungi even get smaller than the root hair fibers, and they actually play a massive role in that soil structure. So if you really want to improve the soil health, when you're in an urban forest, look at that artificial environment and try to mimic something natural. Plans are always really important. Make sure before you do any work, you have plans and you know what's going on. This is where, I swear by surveys. I love maps. Maps are really interesting to me. And maps with many circles on it, very, very interesting to me. And so like looking at this, for example, these are some of the problems that I get when it comes to a consultation, where a landscape designer may design it with the picture, or the homeowner may request it with the picture of, I want all of these trees in here. It's like, okay, well, what species of tree is this? Well, this is, a bur oak, right? And so it's going to be 60 feet tall, and this is going to be a hackberry that's going to be 40 feet tall, and this is going to be a maple, and then we're going to have another bur oak, and then a hackberry and a maple and a bur oak, and it's like that landscape's going to last 15 months before it's overcrowded, right? And so thinking, okay, well, and what do we want to do with this? Whereas the flip side is, if you know that it's going to be overcrowded and you're planning for it, it's not that big of a deal, right? So one of the prescriptions that I offer when I talk about planting is, what do we do? Like we want to replant. Don't get a big tree. That is completely inadvisable. Big trees mean small trees. The bigger the tree you plant, the smaller it will get when it reaches maturity, because it's gone through the most shocking thing you can ever imagine. Ball and burlap trees are a prescription for small trees. Whereas if you get a tree that's in a pot, that's a 3-gallon pot or a 5-gallon pot, it has never lost any of its roots. It has all of its roots, generally speaking, intact from when it was young. And so they recover much faster from transplant. And so if I have a bunch of small trees, it costs a fraction of that a massive one does. And you put those 3 trees in the ground with the work of your arborist or your landscaper, and you say, okay, I've picked a bur oak, I've picked a hickory or a hackberry, and I picked a maple. And they're all a little far apart, and they're all kind of small right now. But give them 3 years, they're going to be big enough. And if you say, okay, well, in 3 years, I'm going to plan to remove the one in the middle and let the other 2 grow. Now you've kept that sort of line and experience that the landscape designer has put in front of you without being stuck with, you didn't invest thousands and thousands of dollars in giant trees that now it's going to be just way too tight. You invest a small amount of money and allow them to grow. But that's the importance of having that sort of plan. It's not easy enough to just say, okay, we're going to put trees here. Trees grow. What's the plan down the track, right? Is your plan to remove a couple down the track? Okay, that works. Is your plan to leave them all and let them grow into hedgerow? Okay, then don't pick the biggest trees in the world unless you have the biggest space in the world. What are the trees growing in? I talked about this a little bit. You want healthy soil. Mycorrhizal fungi are part of that. So those are those little webs, those little threads that I talked about, tying everything together. Mycorrhizal fungi exist in 95% of plants. If you would have asked me this 20 years ago, I would have said mycorrhizal fungi exist in 5% of plants. Things have flipped over their heads. They, science, people, the peer-reviewed research, I should say, of major botanical journals agree that, generally speaking, mycorrhizal fungi exist with 95% of plants. Most plants have relationships with fungi. And what these fungi do is, so this is a tree root right here. There's the soil line, right? And then that root forms a bunch of sinker roots. And those sinker roots go into feeder roots. Well, the kicker with those feeder roots, as small as they get, the only way that they can get nutrients is in the little pores of the soil, right? They rub up against the pores in the soil and they get what they can get, but they're limited by their size. They're actually, when it comes to the microscopic sucking up of water, they're actually too big when it comes to a lot of soils. So mycorrhizal fungi go out, they bond with the roots and they go way, way out into the soil and they collect nutrients, especially phosphorus. And so they are even more sensitive to destruction, just to make things more complicated for everyone out there. But they play this amazing role where most of the time with fertilizers, you're going to find they're full of phosphorus, right? That's the stuff that frosts the rivers when it rains. That's the phosphates from everybody's laundry detergent kind of getting their way into the system. And it's the phosphates from upstream and all of the fertilizer. Those phosphates actually exist naturally in the ground. The problem is that plants have a really hard time drying them out. So the general accepted practice from the 60s up until today is to just dose the soil with massive amounts of phosphates, twice the amount that is generally believed to absorb in the soil, because that's the fastest way that we think we accept. It's accepted widely, I guess, agriculturally, that's how trees can, or how cash crops can get plants. The flip side is that the way trees get plants right now is, or naturally, most plants naturally, including our cash crops, can get them through mycorrhizal fungal associations. So those fungi bond with the roots, and then they go out and they can take the phosphates that the tree and the plants can't normally get. And if you think about it, they take a square peg, round off the edges, whereas the trees have to struggle to get a square peg in a round hole. The fungal associations make it way, way faster. And so what the tree does in return is trades sugars that it makes it takes the phosphorus, goes up to the tree, or goes up into the canopy, makes sugar with cellulose, right? Glucose, the whole photosynthetic process, comes down and gives that sugar to the fungus. So I guess this is a question of the tail wagging the dog. Is the tree control its trading relationship or trading sugar for the fungus, or is the fungus selling its goods to the tree in exchange? Who knows? It's a very, very interesting dynamic. These fungi right here are all three common Ontarian, Carolinian, and St. Lawrence fungal mycorrhizal fungi. So that's American bolete right there, or pine bolete. And then this is your Amanita muscaria, and this is a chanterelle. That one's edible, that one's highly poisonous, and then this one is also edible. Though it tastes like kidneys, generally ill-advised. Pathogenic fungi, so these are decay fungi, and also the ones that I talked about earlier, the ones that grow on the cambium. They're always in there. They're really complicated. I have entire lectures just on them. I'd be happy if anybody has any questions about them later. I'd be happy to move them. I actually have one in my back pocket just to show you if anybody wants more info on decay fungi. Pardon the stupid music. Gonna just move on. This that was just meant to remind me about the anecdote that trees can't heal; they actually seal. So what they do in the process of injury is they compartmentalize, right? So wood, once it's made, isn't actually alive. 90% isn't alive. And so what it does is it shuts down, fills itself with a bunch of different chemicals. Those chemicals are part of what give it its solidity and its tensile strength, and just its value as a building material. Because those chemicals that the plant puts in when it shuts down and creates wood, those chemicals actually give the tree not only stability, but are really meant to keep the tree standing upright and to be resistant to decay. And so what decay does, in effect, is come into that wood, break it down, and different types of species of decay break down wood differently. And some trees, this is where it's important to really beware if you're ever hiring an arborist and somebody says, oh, it's got a mushroom, cut it down. Not all mushrooms are created equally. One part of my personal mission is to make sure that people understand, like, just because a tree has a mushroom, just because a tree is getting old, doesn't mean it needs to be wiped out. I think that's a very big problem with our culture, to be quite frank. And I think that things that are aged are valuable and have history. It's part of that Mac experience, but have history kind of to define, like, get a little hippy dippy here. I guess what I'm trying to say is old trees are pretty cool and they act differently. And just because they're old doesn't mean we should get rid of them. That's kind of what I'm saying. And so when you have decay present in a tree, some types of decay are actually lower risk than most people will have you believe. It depends on where the decay is, and it depends on what type of decay it is. So on this side, on each side of the screen, I have white rot and I have brown rot. So brown rot is rather significant, and it breaks down cellulose, is the stuff that gives plants and wood their tensile strength, right? Like most of clothing, cotton is cellulose. And of course, there's white rot. White rot is the less problematic of the two, and oftentimes far, far more common. And in cases when a tree has white rot, there can be actually a variety of other prescriptions in order to manage the tree. There's one of my favorites. That's Climacode septrianalis. That's common on your sugar maples. And that's just an image of white rot, as it's very stringy and papery, right? A lot of people call it punky wood. There's a Phalaenus, right? So just a bunch of different varieties. This is actually eucalyptus that I love this photo. That right there is that compartmentalization. So the tree just creates itself as it shuts down, and that wood becomes formed, and the chemicals go into the wood to kind of solidify it and give it that structure. It actually builds itself in such a way that it's like a piece of, like, a knotty wood. That structure is not only meant to give the tree the ability, like the structure up and down, but it's meant to resist fungi. And this is a big part of how we prune trees, because if we go back, pruning a tree and leaving the proper wound size and the proper wound collar, the branch bark ridge is what we call it. Right there, you can kind of see that little lip. Leaving that behind allows the tree to actually close over and compartmentalize that decay properly. And if it does, if you have smaller wounds and you don't take out your branch bark ridge and your branch collar, this is where good arborists come in. You do that cut properly, what's going to happen is that fungus might get in, but it hasn't spread to the rest of the tree because it's been stuck in one part of the structure of the wood. It's actually the way it's so remarkable. The way that the wood actually grows is kind of preemptive for stopping and arresting any sort of decay coming in and affecting the rest of the tree. Now, if you just do a flush cut, which is really common, especially with, we call them chuck in the truck, or like, not real arborists, not people who are trained and who care about the trees, guns for hire, whatever. If you do a flush cut like this, what happens is you cut through all of that barrier. And now what'll happen is when the decay gets in, it'll spread to the rest of the tree and drastically shorten the tree's life. This is why we talk about like, oh, why is pruning important? Well, if you're trying to actually maintain the tree for longevity, it might be really important. Especially small, it's always better to prune 10 cuts 2 centimeters than it is to do one cut of 20 centimeters. Right? A 20 centimeter diameter cut is massive and it's really hard on a tree. Whereas if you have 10 cuts of 2 centimeters a piece, really easy for a tree to close and seal over. Just a little close up there. These are just some close-ups of wood. If you guys want to go back into that a little bit later, that's good. Risks and rewards. So managing risk, in this case, this is a location where, this is an elm tree and it's got a little bit of a decay fungus up there. Are we really that worried about it? This is, if you notice, for me as a tree risk assessor, right, there's 3 strollers. That is an office building and it has a playground out back, and you know that people are walking around there. There's the tree right there. What species of tree is it? It's an American elm. It's an American elm. It's quite healthy. It's a remarkable form and structure, and it's got a little bit of decay. So what do we do to manage it? Do we cut it down? We could, and that would absolutely mitigate the risk. It would also get rid of all the shade. It would also destroy the value. It would also get rid of a block that protects the sidewalk from errant cars in the winter, which is something that many people seem to forget about. Like, trees are really helpful for that. And I've seen a few drunk drivers that have hit trees instead of homes. So big advocate for, one of many reasons to have trees in the street side. But anyway, what was the approach? The approach was actually just to prune the limb that was a little bit decayed. It's still there 6 years later. This is just another shot from Russia. As you can see, this is what happens the year after those trees get pruned. So you get all these little whips. And from what I understand, in the summertime, they look quite nice. For me, it would be really difficult because I know that that's not what that tree should look like. That is but it's a great way to manage risk. That's your classic hydro pruning, right? Trees in the urban environment. Talked about that. This is a common one as well. Trees that this was in Ottawa. I think we're far enough away now from time. I was working with a client in Ottawa and in a major federal park, and I was asked to show up just to consult on some potential tree damage. And this is the watering system for a very large display that is meant to celebrate nature. And they went through all of the roots of this ash tree that they were treating to keep alive for a while. Now, because it was ash tree, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it's just ironic we don't, and the common thing is we didn't realize this would happen. So, yeah, of course, because the problems come 2 or 3 years later. Yes. So this is a classic one as well for me. So this is actually from the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria. That is what the tree looked like when it was standing up. Right next to it is a school. This was the school. Fortunately, this happened on a Sunday. Thank goodness. But the interesting thing about this, I actually took some photos after all was said and done, and there was a new photos there. No, it's not. This fence right here, and you can actually go back and Google and see it before and after they put this fence up. And one of the main posts for the fence went right through one of the main structural roots of this tree. This is a Eucalyptus regnans, the largest flowering tree species in the world. Absolutely beautiful if you ever have a chance to see them in person, but also looming and terrifying when it falls on a building. This, on the other hand, is the opposite example. So where we talked about with the eucalyptus of not consulting with an arborist or not talking to somebody who knows trees when you're doing a construction project, this was the exact opposite. So this is actually in Hobart, Tasmania. And I'm driving down the road and I saw it, and I actually had to like stop and turn my car around because I was like, whoa, there's a tree growing out of that building. This is a Phoenix canariensis, one of the coolest palm trees in the world. You can get it as a potted plant here. It's got a lot of spikes. Not great to prune, but beautiful tree. The tree, though, was growing out of the building. Now I stopped, had to go in and ask what the story was. Well, turns out, guy was saying to me that this was actually outside of the building at one point, and people kept coming up and they kept putting their bikes on the tree, and it kept kind of injuring the tree, and they wanted to also build expand a little bit. So instead of cutting the tree down, they called an arborist. The arborist said, okay, this is how you do it. Walked them through the whole process. And amazingly enough, they kept the tree. And I said, well, what do you think now that you've done it? Was it worth it? Well, we've got to get someone in every year to inspect. And it was innovative. And it was also one of the best things I've ever done for my business. Now, amazingly enough, I came in to get the tree. And when I walked in, he had a coffee shop as part of the bike shop. And I basically asked them this question while I was ordering a coffee, because why not? And he said, everybody stops to look at the tree and then they buy a coffee. And I made more money from the coffee shop than I ever would have with the bikes. Building around the tree actually was the best thing for him from a business perspective, which I think is a brilliant win. So solving problems, and this is the thing when it comes to my industry, our knowledge is always developing. And so if you want to save time and money, you got to plan ahead. You got to know what's going on before you start to put a shovel in the ground, before you're even on site to do that. Because if you want to maintain the trees and you want to save money on your project, it's a lot easier to say, okay, you know what, we want to put this here, the tree's got to come down. Then you make that choice when you don't have a house in the way. In this case, you can see this is a relatively new subdivision, the new tree that they planted when they built the subdivision. Well, this tree fell, and you can see there's a fence in the background here, went right through one of the structural roots. Took it from that tree and took it out a year later, or I brought it home, and a year later, this is what happened. So this is a Pholiota sclerosa. It is a decay fungus. Surprise, surprise. Plan ahead. Start small, because otherwise you're going to have to pay for, an arm and a leg to get a tree off your house, which is never fun because you lose the tree and you got house damages. You got to deal with insurance. Ugh, it's awful. It's much easier to maintain the tree and know what's going on. When you're planting, you want to think of a lot of different things, but generally, what's nearby, what's your environment, what's the area's moisture like, right? So small trees, Japanese flowering cherry, apple, magnolia, excuse me, relatively common. Redbud, sumac, serviceberry, pawpaw, I love, and I encourage anybody to ask questions about that. Serviceberry is it's in vogue right now. I think a lot of people really like it. I know it sounds fashiony, but it is in fashion. I think the next summer's hot tree is going to be pawpaw. I'm telling you. Native fruit tree. Got to be careful when you eat these fruits. I just found out recently they are poisonous unless you get them at the exact moment of ripeness, which is one of the reasons why there's not a commercial pawpaw industry, right? It's not the same. One of the reasons why we don't have so many pawpaws is because apples, they last all year, right? They don't break down. They're genetically engineered over many, many years of breeding to be that way. Pawpaw has been bred for a high quality of food, like a nutritional quality and a taste quality. It doesn't have that sort of long shelf life though. Service berries on the left. Many of you have seen medium-sized trees. okay, instead of Norway maple and European white birch, let's try and avoid those Norway maples, especially. They're invasive. As a climber, I love climbing them. They're super fun. But yeah, I'd avoid them. What are we looking at instead? Red maple, ironwood, locusts, American beech, sassafras I love, and ironwood I love. Obviously, named the business after that. Here we are. Sassafras has a variety of different leaves. They're a little bit more sensitive, so keep that in mind. Ironwood has that nice bark, and those are the fruits. The fruits look like hops, which gives it its other name, hop hornbeam. And that's a beech in the top left. I give conifers their own listing because I believe conifers have the short end of the stick. So instead of an Austrian pine and Colorado blue spruce, a lot of problems with blue spruce. This is not their environment. Natively, they're used to cool winters and drier summers. They do not get dry summers here, and so they get a whole host of foliar fungal diseases. White pine, eastern white cedar. Eastern white cedars, everybody does as a hedge. Try planting it as a tree. It's a really nice tree. Don't get, and beware of getting ones from the West Coast. White spruce, tamarack, and hemlock are examples right there. The one on the left is Austrian pine. The one right is the blue spruce. There's the beautiful tamarack in all its yellow glory. I love that autumn color. The white pine is the white pine. None of these, and this is one of our challenges, none of these really do well with construction. Larch is a little bit better. Some people don't like that it drops its needles. I love it. There's a lot of concerns with your conifers, right? Hedging. And why is it important to actually pay attention to anything? What I just said, construction is a major entry point of decay. Decay gets into trees because trees get damaged. Sometimes that's natural. In the urban environment, more often than not, it's artificial. It's machine related, abiotic, as we say. Planning ahead is a great way to manage risk, right? There's lots of ways to manage risk. You can get rid of a tree. You can never leave your house. You can stay in bed all day. All great ways to manage risk. If you want more life, you got to take a little bit of risk. Okay, we have a little bit on disease here, but I think it's a good time to leave it at that and go to some questions, see what's out there, and we can go on more if there's a quiet audience. I'm seeing 6 in the chat, and Anelia is back. Hey, how are you?
All right, so we have a few questions here. Thanks so much, Kyle. And I'll start with the first one here. Should efforts be made to eliminate buckthorn, which is, we all know it's highly invasive?
Yeah, so buckthorn is, this is a tough question. I love it. So the long and the short of it is, with many of these invasive species, it's just a case of management. So we're never going to get rid of them. In some circumstances, it's like creating introducing a biological control, which is what the CFIA did for emerald ash borer. In other cases, like with Norway maples or buckthorn, I think we remove it where we can. We keep it good land stewardship, really. We take care of it in areas where it's within our control. I've got a line out back. There's a bunch of buckthorn. I've been slowly working to get rid of it. McMaster, another great example. If any of you have an opportunity to go to the McMaster Conservation Corridor in West Hamilton, not many people know about it, but the biology section did a number on it about 4 or 5 years ago, just cutting volunteers, right? Showing up, cutting down buckthorn, having a great big old burn, and they got rid of a whole heap of it. It's a great way to go. There are biological controls. One of them is called Lalside chondro, which is it's actually a native fungus that's sprayed on the stumps once you cut it. Speaking as an arborist, speaking in all contexts, it's a nightmare to work with, and it's really expensive. If you have an area and you've got a large area, sometimes it's worthwhile to actually, once again, have a plan and know what you're getting into, because if you just go in there and you start hacking like crazy, or you go at the wrong time of year, worst case, You go in when it's berry season, and then you just make it worse on your property. Yeah. Patty seems like she's been through this before.
And we do organize volunteer events, removing buckthorn, but it does seem like a never-ending battle. But it really,
I think it is just a matter of like letting people know, and volunteer efforts are great, because I think stewardship builds that relationship to the land, and with that comes more stewardship, right? Like begets like.
Awareness, yeah. So next questions are lichens indicators that a tree is declining, and can it be saved?
Are lichens indicators that a tree is declining? I love it. Okay, so no, not in the slightest, actually. Lichens have a lot of different variables. In one sense, first of all, for those who don't know, lichens aren't plants and they're not fungi. They're actually a symbiotic and inseparable symbiotic relationship between a fungus and a cyanobacteria, to be quite specific. So like actually more of an algae, blue-green algae is what they used to be called. And so they can't filter out pollution for the life of them. And the reason I say this is because we get this question a lot. Can you remove this lichen? What can you do about it? Oftentimes it's a sign that you have good air quality. So if you have a bunch of different species of lichen, it generally means that the air has less pollution in it. You go to downtown Toronto, for example, Hamilton on, I think it's called Nikola Tesla now, but Burlington, you would find nothing. Another good example is the Jack Daniel's Kentucky Sour Mash. The trees in the area are coated with this black lichen because of the sugar in the air from the distillery. It's wild. Like lichen tells this crazy story. So the one color of lichen that I would warn everybody on is it's like a bright orangey green, like, and it usually comes up in patches. This is completely anecdotal. I did not read this in a book, so this is the one, no research here, personal. When you get a tree that starts to die back, usually from it's either codominant and it's shading itself out, or it's having an issue with, the roots have died, whatever. That top starts to die back, sunlight will get in, and that's where you'll get that lichen flourishing. And it's not so much that the lichen is impacting the tree. Most of the time, it's just a benign ecosystem member living on the bark, benign macroorganism. But what it will do is if it's in the canopy and I see it, I'm like, oh, what the heck's what's going on here? Like, oh, something broke out of there a long time ago. Like you can kind of get a little bit of history from it. But it's kind of like, it's a symptom. It's not the actual problem. If you're seeing it, it's like, okay, look a little bit more, but that's specifically that yellow, green, that bright orange one. I'll see if I can find it online. Share my screen. Send me another question though. Yeah, there it is. Okay, cool. Can everybody see that?
I don't. Oh, no.
So this lichen here is actually one that that sort of color, those are the sort of red flags when it comes to lichen. But like these ones, lobaria, for example, actually really good sign. So just to close the lichen discussion, there's a great book out there called The Wild Trees. I highly recommend it for everybody. But it talks about the discovery of arboreal ecosystems and the discovery of Hyperion, which I believe is still the tallest tree in the world at 100 meters. It may have been surpassed by the president, but I'm not sure. The president, the tree, not the president, the president. Dr. Steve Sillett, who discovered these arboreal ecosystems, did a great study on lichen and the role that they play in the ecosystem. And naturally what they do is they pull in, and they grow all over the trees in the Sequoia rainforest. We have lobarias here as well. They take the nitrogen that's out of in the air, and they create their own nitrogen, which is incredible, but they're living on the trees. Why does that matter? Well, they eventually fall off the trees in a rainstorm, or an animal knocks them off, or a windstorm, and it finds its way into the soil, and it breaks down, and it actually contributes up to 3% of the soil profile of the nitrogen, soil nitrogen in the coast rainforest. So they're not bad things for your trees, just like your leaves, right? When your leaves fall off, that's a good thing for your soil as well.
Fascinating. So next question, do you have an opinion on compost tea treatments?
Yes, I have a very strong opinion. The opinion is very similar to fertilizer. If if you went to the doctor, you sat down with the doctor, and the doctor walked in and said, you need a knee replacement, would you trust that doctor? Kind of be like, well, I'm actually here because I'm having trouble sleeping. You need a knee replacement. It would be really strange. And I feel like this is exactly the same when it comes to fertilizer and when it comes to compost tea. You want to get, most of the time, you want to get some tests done, right? Get a blood test, get a urine sample, know what's going on with your body. It's the same with the tree. Compost teas work if it's the formula for the soil. But how do you know what the formula for the soil is if you've never tested it? You need to diagnose before you have like a management plan. Otherwise it just doesn't work. So some compost tea, yeah, well, what's in the compost tea? Oh, compost. Okay, so is that dog poop? Is that horse poop? Because those are, to be quite frank, poop is amazing when it comes to compost, but there's just such a variety out there, right? Sheep manure, chicken manure, goat manure, cow manure, and horse manure all have different uses, and they're different tools in the toolbox. And so if you're going to use compost tea, make sure you know what you're treating for. Just like a doctor, if they're going to start to put you on medication, make sure they've done some tests to figure out what your baselines are first. That's just good practice. It's the same for us. Now, I will say on fertilizer, keep it simple, and same thing. Fertilizer is like really strong medicine. It doesn't stay in the soil. It's short-lived. So if your tree becomes really dependent on that fertilizer and you try to pull it away, it will decline. That's not good, but it becomes used to a certain regimen. If you're treating, know what you're treating with and know what you're treating for. Because if you're, okay, I'm going to throw boron on my oak, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not just not a thing. So I hope that kind of makes sense. If anybody wants me to go into fertilizer, good uses for fertilizer, I'd love to. But make sure you know what's going on in your compost tea.
Yeah, I love that. Take the holistic approach. So are you okay, Kyle, if we go with a few more questions? I know.
Yeah, I went a little bit long on the talk, so absolutely.
Yeah. So if you have polypore growing under from a Colorado blue spruce, is that a reason for concern?
Ooh, I love the question. I'm going to encourage this person to take a photo and send it to me. Or if they can put it up in the chat, I know. Of course, it's pitch dark outside, so probably not a great time. Yeah, so polypores it's just a general catch-all. Like it's like saying dogs. Like, are we talking like a German Shepherd or a Chihuahua? There are some that are not a big deal. And when you say a polypore at the base of a Colorado, it kind of helps to lower it down to a few. The one that I want to watch, that I encourage you to watch out for, Google's great here. Okay. Scylophyzum commune, or commune. This one, don't eat it. It will grow in your mouth. It only happened to one person once, but still. This is a common sort of sapwood rot. Comes usually when a tree is far gone. When I hear there's fungus growing on a tree, it's like, is it a tree or is it a tree? Because that's also helpful. I think the first thing that you need to do is determine where it's coming out and where it's going. So if it's a sapwood rot, normally you can follow the fruiting bodies to kind of get an idea of how much space it's taking up. If it's going all the way around in a complete circle around the tree, that's much worse than if it goes up in a line straight up and down, right? Because there's less of a risk of it cutting off all the way across. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up, folks, if it makes sense. But basically, if I like cut, oh, hey, that's what this is for. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to cut it down and the plant can stay fully on top. Whereas if you go across in a transverse way, a radial way, pardon me, it's not going to be good. And that's essentially what the decay does, right? Like it slowly cuts all of those little cells and breaks them down. So you want to make sure that where that polypore is, it's going to be, it's not going to completely destroy the wood.
All right, thank you. So we have here a question or comment rather, trying to help my Ganch white hemlock to survive, and also need help with my slippery elm. It's my second year with it and looked better this year. So it's a hemlock and a slippery elm.
Okay, so white hemlock. Oh, that's not right. Ganch white hemlock. Interesting. Okay, so this is more of a shrub. I can tell you for absolute certain, a common problem that I see with hemlocks is that they're planted in too much sunlight, and they get startled. So hemlocks they generally are an understory species. They're one of our native understory conifers. We don't have a lot of those. White pine, red pine, balsam fir, they're all like, they have to be tip top full sun. Hemlocks aren't like that. So I've seen it a few times where everything's fine and then a tree gets removed and then the hemlock gets just like boom, hammered by the sun, and it can recover. But what you really want to watch out for, make sure you mulch around the base, because mulching helps to prevent moisture loss. If it's a ball shape, and Yulian, can you ask if it's a ball shape or if it's a larger, because that also matters as well, right? So if it's a tree form, that's a different story. But generally speaking, like if it's a shrub,
it's a baby.
It's a baby. Oh, okay. Well, if it's a baby,
yeah.
oh, and if it's getting completely lasered by the sun, then burlap, like put up a little burlap blind for the first little while. I had a metasequoia, pardon me, Don Redwood. Thank you. Planted like a tiny thing. And its first summer, it got scorched south sun for 4 or 5 hours a day, and put up a little tomato cage, wrapped the burlap around it, left it there all season. It was fine. Second season, left it. Now it's about 35, 40 centimeters tall. It's something, especially if it's hemlock, and if it's going to be full sun all the time, you're just going to need to keep in mind to keep it moist, because if you're keeping it soil moist and its roots like hydrated, you'll be able to keep it going. That's always what I see is with folks, is that they put something generally supposed to be shade, partial shade, and full sun, and then they don't water it more. You should water it more if that's the case. And then the slippery elm, what was the question with the slippery elm?
It seems like it wasn't doing so great. It looked better this year, so I'm not sure if yeah, probably just any best practices.
Yeah, and that's where the mulching really catches all.
Slippery elm gets white fungus.
White fungus on the leaves. Oh, that would be powdery. That sounds like it's powdery mildew.
Yeah, on the leaves, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the time that's just aesthetic. It won't make a big deal for the long-term health of the plant. What you can do with mildews is and this goes for other foliar pathogens. So some of you probably have Norway maples that have the tar spot, those ugly black spots on them every year. You can leave them. The tar spot really doesn't make that big of a difference for the nutrients of the tree. Like it's kind of like a benign pathogen. I don't need that. Yeah. So let me finish the tar discussion. So basically the tar spot, you can leave it. It's going to reinfect every season. So what your best bet is to actually get rid of those leaves, whether you bag them, take them to the curb, you burn them, put them in your compost to break down. Keep in mind that fungus load's still going to be there. But if you leave the leaves at the base of your tree, in that case, especially if you've got that mildew, powdery mildew, same thing, it can reinfect. Something else to keep in mind is if you're seeing that powdery mildew, you might be watering too much. That is something that happens. Remember, when you water, you don't need to get water on the leaves. Some people think that you do. You don't. You're not cooling the leaves off either when you spray it in the warm day. Don't water during the day from 9:30 a.m. until 3 p.m. Don't water in the high season. Just don't. You'll scorch your leaves. A lot of people have done that. And like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm cooling it down. Like, you're not cooling it down, you're killing it. And so yeah, there you go. There's some tips there.
Great, thanks, Kyle. We have one more question, if that's okay. So Barb is asking, two mature ashes planted over 30 years ago and treated annually, continue to treat or stop and see what happens?
Oh Lord. Okay. So I think I have some misgivings about drilling into the base of a tree repeatedly year after year. I think that maintaining the ash is good. I think what you need to do is look at the physiological health of the tree. Is it physiologically healthy? Because there's some that I know of that look perfect. The word I have heard used is blingin'. And they're beautiful, and they're relics. They're endangered species. They're like black rhino or ivory-billed woodpecker. People don't realize it. I get choked up because it's like, this is not even a species. It's like 3 or 4 genuses of like this incredible canopy species gone, just gone. And so if you can preserve it, you're kind of like preserving a monument of sorts. And I've heard people kind of talk about it, because like this was a picture of a time in North America, right? Where we had already lost the American elm through another pathogen, invasive, and we had lost the American chestnut.
Oh, Kyle, I think we lost you.
Ash trees nowadays, there's a bit of a risk surrounding, they are declining. We know that. So if you're saving your pennies and you're doing it for the sake of conservation, that's great. But make sure that you're having it inspected. And I would actually encourage you to consider hiring a good arborist, ISA certified, strongly advise that, to say, hey, like, give me an opinion. Not someone who's going to say cha-ching when they see your ash trees and think that they're just going to make big money cutting it down, but somebody who is interested in like the cultural value and the ecological value.
Conservation, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I know we often get questions about pruning and when is the best time, just because whenever you contact someone, they are ready to prune right away. And, sometimes it may be just the best time to prune when the trees are dormant. But again, like, just do your research when you're hiring an arborist, because trees are very special, and it's conservation should be the first thing that we have in mind. Yeah, so it's I think it's 10 after 6, so we're gonna wrap it up. If anyone has further questions, please feel free to email them to us, and we'll do our best to forward to Kyle and to reply to you. But thank you so much, Kyle. That was very informative. We do have some great comments here. Thank you, very interesting, and thanks for all that information. And we look forward to being in touch with you, and hopefully run like an in-person event where you can take us on a walk and show us some, some.
I would love that. Oh, there's so many great places too to do that. So yeah. Well, I love that idea.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks to everyone for joining. I hope you have a great evening, and feel free again to stay in touch with us.
Thanks, Anelia.